Hi guys, right, time for chapter 2. This one is entitled Inside the Dragon Nursery. You'll have probably guessed by now that Hiccup was not your natural Viking hero. For a start, he didn't look like a hero. Somebody like Snotlout, for instance, was tall and muscly, covered in skeleton tattoos and already had the beginnings of a small moustache. Hiccup, on the other hand, was a bit on the small side. He had the kind of face that was almost entirely unmemorable. He did have heroic hair though, which was a very bright red and stood up vertically, however much she tried to wet it down with seawater. But nobody ever saw that because it was always hidden under his helmet. You would never have picked Hiccup out of those 10 boys to be the hero of the story. Snotlout was good at everything. Dog's Breath was as tall as his father and could do amusing things like farting to the tune of the Berk National Anthem. Hiccup was just average. So when Gobber blew the horn and moved out of sight to find a rock to sit on, Snotlout pushed Hiccup out of the way and took charge. "Listen up, boys," he whispered in a menacing fashion. "I'm the one in charge, not the useless. And anybody who objects gets a knuckle sandwich from Dog's Breath." Dog's Breath, delighted to oblige, gave Hiccup a shove that sent him sprawling headfirst into the snow. Then for good measure he stuck his face in it. Snotlout looked at Fishlegs suspiciously. It was difficult to tell whether Fishlegs was laughing at him because he had a squint. Snotlout had been told by Fishlegs that he was the best at everything. I'm not sure that Fishlegs is actually being serious. Are you? They all began to tie themselves together, ready for the climb. Hiccup and Fishlegs were the last to be tied on, just behind Dog's Breath. "Oh, brilliant," muttered Fishlegs. "I'm about to enter a cave full of man-eating reptiles, tied up to 8 complete and utter maniacs." Hiccup was nervous. He put the lighted torch between his teeth and started climbing up after the others. It was a perilous climb. The rocks were slippery with snow, and the other boys were completely overexcited, climbing up far too quickly. At one point, Clueless missed his footing and fell. Luckily, he landed on Dog's Breath, who caught him by the back of his trousers and heaved him back up the rock again. Otherwise, he would have brought the whole load of rocks down on top of them. When they finally made it to the mouth of the cave, Hiccup looked down briefly at the sea, pounding the rocks way below, and swallowed really hard. "Hiccup, he has to go into the cave first because he is the son of the chief," he sneered. "And if any dragons are awake, luckily he'll be the first to know about it." Now, although he wasn't your usual mindless thug of a hooligan, Hiccup was no wimp either. Being frightened, you see, is not the same as being a coward. Maybe he was as brave as everyone else there because he went to catch the dragon despite knowing what dragons are like. When he climbed to the mouth of the cave and found that inside there was a long twisty tunnel, he still went down it, despite not being too keen on long twisty tunnels with dragons at the end of them. The tunnel itself was drippy and clammy, at times high enough for the boys to walk upright, then at other times it would close into narrow claustrophobic holes that the boys could only just squeeze through, squirming on their tummies. After 10 long minutes of walking and crawling into the heart of the cliff, the stench of dragon, which smelt a bit like salty stink of seaweed and old mackerel heads, got stronger and stronger until finally it became unbearable. The tunnel opened up into a ginormous cavern. This cavern was full of more dragons than Hiccup could have ever imagined existed. They were every possible colour and size, and they included all the species that Hiccup had heard of, quite a few more that he hadn't. He started sweating as he looked around him at pile and pile of the animals draped over every available surface. They were all fast asleep and snoring in unison. This means that the sound they created was so loud and so deep it seemed to penetrate right into Hiccup's body and vibrate all around his insides, churning his stomach and forcing his own heart to beat at the same slow dragon pulse. If just one of those creatures were to wake up, it would raise the alarm, and the boys would meet the most awful death. Hiccup closed his eyes. "I will not think about it," he said to himself. "I will not." Do you think he's showing the attributes of being a chief there? I think he's quite scared. What do you think? None of the other boys, though, were thinking about it. Ignorance is useful in these circumstances, and their eyes were popping with excitement as they walked through the cave, their hands over their noses to keep out the revolting smell, each of them looking for the biggest dragons they could find that they could fit into their baskets. Predictably, most of these boys headed towards the plug uglies of the dragon world. Snotlout, well, of course he made a big fuss about grabbing a vicious-looking monstrous nightmare. Wartyhog and Dog's Breath got into a loudly whispered fight, which is a bit silly, over a Gronicle, which is a heavily armoured brute with fangs like kitchen knives sticking out, so much that it couldn't even keep its own mouth shut. Dog's Breath won and managed to drop it as he was trying to put it in his basket. The Gronicle opened its evil crocodile eyes. Everybody heard their breath. The Gronicle stared ahead. It was difficult to tell from its blank expression whether it was awake or asleep. Hiccup realised the gossamer thin third eyelid was still down. It stayed there for a few heart-stopping moments until it slowly closed its upper eyelids again. None of the other dragons actually woke up. A few grumbled before making themselves comfy again, but most were in such a stupor that they barely stared. Hiccup slowly let out the breath he had been holding in. He swallowed hard, muttered a prayer to Loki, who's the patron saint of sneaky exploits, and edged towards to grab the most unconscious-looking dragon he could find so he could get out of this nightmare as fast as possible. Now, I don't know if you know, but dragons grow colder the deeper they sleep. Dragons can even go into a sleep coma where they're icy cold with no pulse, breath or heartbeat. They can stay in this state for centuries, and only a highly skilled expert can tell from looking at them if they are alive or dead. But a dragon who is awake or lightly sleeping is ever so warm indeed, a bit like bread that has just come out of the oven. Hiccup found one the right size and manoeuvred it into his basket as quickly and as carefully as he could. It was a very basic brown, but at that moment Hiccup did not care. He just wanted to get out of there super quick. "I did it! I did it! I did it!" he chatted happily to himself. He wasn't going to be the only boy in the class without a dragon. Everyone had got one now and was slowly creeping towards the exit. Uh-oh. Oops. Except for Fishlegs. He was even worse at burglary than Dog's Breath was. He was already covered in a bright, itchy rash. Oh my goodness. He's allergic, would you believe it, to dragons. Fishlegs has a dragon allergy. Oh dear. He was making his way at that very moment to a pile of knottily entangled nadders. Hiccup stopped dead in his tracks. "Don't do it, Fishlegs. Please don't do it," he whispered as loud as he dare. But Fishlegs was fed up of Snotlout taking the mickey out of him. He was going to get the coolest dragon in the world. Squinting so hard he could barely see the pile of dragons, he reached slowly towards the bottommost dragon, took its leg in his hand, and ever so gently pulled it. The entire pile of dragons came rushing down in a tangle of limbs, wings and ears. Everyone in the cave gave a horrified gasp. What do you think's going to happen? Most of the nadders snapped crossly at each other and went back to sleep. One brute, though, opened his eyes and blinked. Hiccup noted with great relief that the third eyelid was still down. The boys waited, frozen like this, for the eyelids to close. And then Fishlegs sneezed. 4 gigantic sneezes that went echoing and bouncing off the walls. The big nadder stared ahead, but very faintly, an ominous purring-like noise began in his throat. Then, very, very slowly, the third eyelid slid upward. "Uh-oh," said Hiccup. Now, that's where I'm going to leave it. So tune in tomorrow to find out what happens. Have a lovely evening and rest of your day, guys.